Hello and welcome back to another JavaScript tutorial. We're continuing our exploration of the Excel API. In the last video, we were talking about how we can select a range of cells. So I'm assuming at this point you feel relatively comfortable of selecting cell ranges. And now you want to work on actually taking the values inside of those Excel ranges and manipulating them. So that's the focus of today's video. We're going to see how we can basically grab values from an Excel range. We're going to do really basic manipulation, and then we're going to put values back into an Excel range all on our own doing. So three kind of different things that we're going to be doing: grabbing, manipulating, and putting back. And we're going to also see kind of the little bit of caveats when it comes to working with values. It's no longer just, how would I put it? It's no longer just assuming it's all values. There's values, text, formulas R1, C1, bunch of different stuff. So let's do the most basic thing. I have a range of cells up here at the top. I want to go and grab the values from this range of cells. What would it look like? Well, as you can tell right here, I do have a function, an async function that I've already defined. It's called grabbing values. I'm not going to go through the details of async and everything like that. I'm assuming you know it at this point. We've defined the sheet that we want to work with. Right now, it is the current sheet that we're on, so the active sheet. And now that we're here, it's pretty basic. It's basically kind of like the last video. We're going to now define the range that we want to work with. So grab the range we want to work with. And that's going to say something like this. We're going to say let sales range equal the sheet that we're on. And we're going to call the get range method, and then we pass through a string which represents the range address. So in this case, I want B2 to E7. And then from here, where's my E? I can't type tonight. Okay, so that will now grab that range. It's going to store it in a variable called sales range, but we're not technically working with the values yet. So now here we're going to load some properties about our range. The first one that we're going to load is values. That's pretty straightforward. That is simply the values inside that range. There's another property called text. That is basically taking this entire range and it's going to treat everything as text. So even if it's a number, it's going to be text. Even if it's text, it's text. But really the important part is anything inside of this range, regardless of its data type, will be text. It will be converted to text. There's another one called formulas. Formulas will actually take this final value right here, because if you look here, this is simply a formula, and it will maintain that formula. If we use values or text, then what's going to happen is it's going to basically override that formula and simply take the value at hand. And then finally, there's formulas R1, C1. Formulas R1, C1 is just a different notation for the formula, but we're going to see where that one comes in handy when we want to move formulas from one range to the next range. So that's really the different parts that we need to understand at this juncture. So we're going to load some properties. We're going to load the different value properties. And so again, we're going to call our sales range. We're going to call the load method. And then in this example, because we're loading multiple properties, we're going to pass through a list where each element is going to simply be the property that we want to load. So the first one is values. The second one is text. The third one is formulas. And then the fourth one and final one is formulas R1, C1. And then we're just going to put our little semicolon at the end. We're going to call await context.sync to load those properties. And then from here, now we can do the fun stuff. So now we can actually grab the values. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to grab the values. And that's going to look something like this. We're going to say let my values equal sales range. And then we're going to call dot values. And then from here, let's print out those particular, those values. So what we'll do is we'll do console.log my values. And then I'm going to open up my run pane. Okay, and so we're going to do the grab one. And as you can see here, it is simply an array within an array. And if you open up each array, you will see the corresponding items in that array. So it's basically The way I kind of like to think about it is you have your outer array, and then you have your inner array, which represents each row, and then each element in this array is representing that column value, so the individual cell value. This is kind of the highest level you can go. If you wanted to, you could technically slice it a little bit. This is how it would look sliced. So I could say my values, and maybe I only want the second row. It's 0 base, so we would start at 1. I'm going to comment this out so that way it's not too much information off the same screen. And this would return the second row, which is right here. So, well, first if you don't include the header, but it's technically the second. And again, maybe I want the second element in the second row. Well, then again, we just kind of, attach it on. And now we get that actual cell value. So this is slicing that array. So again, an array is just simply a collection of elements inside of JavaScript or TypeScript, but you can see all this value is simply an array inside of JavaScript. If you were watching my Python videos where we were working with Win32com, it's pretty much identical, except in that one we were working with tuples, but the same logic is really applying here. We're just simply grabbing each array, and then we can slice it to go to a deeper level inside of it. That's really how you should think about it. So that's kind of slicing a single cell. So here I would say slice a row, and then here I would say slice a column in a specific row. That's kind of how I would think about it if I was doing my mental shortcuts. So what if we wanted to loop through an entire array? How would that work? Well, lucky for us, there's two different ways we can do it. There's a for loop and a for each loop. I like the for each loops just because they tend to be a little bit more concise, and there's different parameters that we can disregard. So let's loop through, in this example, each row and then each column in each row. So first, we're going to do my values. So we're going to call my values for each. And then we're going to define a function inside of this for each. And it's going to take two arguments. It's going to be row and index. And then from here, I'm going to do my squirrely brackets. I'm going to open that up. And then what we'll do is we'll print each row. So we'll print each row. And so that would be console.log, and it would be row. So as you can tell here, I'm just simply saying, hey, each row, and then the index for each row. And then if I want each column, well, I'll just do a loop inside of a loop. That's kind of how I like to think about it. So then we'll loop through each column. So loop through each column in each row. And so it would be row for each, because it's an array still, function, and then it's pretty much identical. I'm just going to change some naming conventions. So it would be index2, my squirrely brackets, and then I would say print each column. Alrighty, and then from here, what we'll do is we'll just do console.log and then column. So hopefully you saw what I was doing here. It's two loops. There's an outer loop and an inner loop. The outer loop is going to loop through each row like this, and then the inner loop is going to do this, 1, 2, 3. So it's just going to keep looping through each one. That's how you need to think about it. So if we run it now, we should see each item being print out individually along with each row. So you can see here was our first row, each item in that row, the second row, each item, the third row, each item, the fourth row, so on and so on and so on. So it's just looping through, and it's basically printing out each element. So here we can say loop through an entire array of values. It's just very important. We have to understand how those values are structured. If you didn't understand, like, oh, well, this is technically an array, and then this is an array within that array, and then there's the individual elements, it's very confusing, and it wouldn't look very intuitive. You're like, wait a minute, why is it not working doing that? Well, let's also discuss another component. What happens if we just wanted to take those values and just print them out to the console, but we didn't want to have to do a loop? How would that look? Well, inside of JavaScript, there is JSON objects, which are basically like dictionaries that we were working with inside of Python. but JavaScript makes working with JSON objects really easy. So what we're going to do is we're just going to print out the different formats that we kind of have up here. So text, formulas, and then formulas R1, C1. And so this would actually be really straightforward. So I'm just going to do console.log. It would be JSON object, and then there's a Stringify method, and then there's a couple parameters. The first parameter is the values that you want to stringify. So in this case, it would just be my values. The second parameter is, well, what do you want to do if there's a missing value? What do you want to put there? I want to just put a null value. And then spacing. How much spacing do you want, or how many indentations do you want at each level? I'm okay with 1 at this point. What I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out, Control KC, and let's see what we would get if we would do that. Okay, so now you can see it's basically this JSON structure, which again is the list, and then that list inside of a list, or an array within inside of an array. So that's doing my values. Stringify the values. I'm going to console log this. Oh, you know what? Sorry, I forgot to put values at the end of it. Let's take a look and see what that's how you should be doing. I mean, technically you can do it the other way too. Is that not the right one? Oh, I know what I did wrong. Okay, that's technically right. My bad. I was getting confused for a little bit. Because this is sales range dot values, this is technically okay. For the other ones though, it's not, because I haven't defined a variable that's going to be referencing like the text component and the formulas R1, C1. So you're going to see it change just slightly. So what I'm going to do, instead of doing my values, I'm going to do sales range, and then I'm going to do text. And so how does that one look different compared to the other one? Well, you can see that everything is now treated as text. It's got the quotation marks around it. Okay, well, what about formulas? How would that look? Well, let's take a look. And then we'll do formulas. We'll grab that. So this one just maintains the formula as a string. And then naturally, you can probably imagine how the R1, C1 will pop up as well. So we'll say formulas, R1, C1. So I will do that. You can see now it's just R1, C1 notation for each formula. It's still a string, but it's just a different notation for that particular formula. Okay, so that does it for the most part when we want to go and grab values. Let's assume you grabbed a value and now you wanted to, manipulate some of those values inside of it. How would that look? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some of this information that I have right up here, and we're going to drop it down in the second function. And we'll do something very simple with this one. I'm going to take this range, so the one up here, and I'm just going to do a basic manipulation where I'm going to add 2 to every single element. So if it's a string, it's just going to concatenate. If it's a number, it's simply going to add 2 to it. And then I want to drop that manipulated range down into this section right down here. So we're going to be leveraging some loops again, and then we're also going to have to store our manipulated values inside of an array. So the idea behind this function is you have some values, you want to load those values, you then want to manipulate those values, and then you want to put them back into a different range. This is kind of how it would look if you just want to do a very broad manipulation across everything. And then in the final one, we're going to see how we can take a range, move it, and then keep the formulas the same, because ideally we might want to move our copy range or whatever it might be. We might want to move some stuff, but we don't want to necessarily call the copy method. Well, how would we move it in order to do that? All right, so what we'll do is we'll take the range values that we currently have. I'm fine with that. And now we need to start looping through those values. And so really what we can do, if we want, we can actually just leverage this little guy up here, because he's doing like pretty much exactly the same thing. And then we're just going to add some different components to it, because we already know what this is doing. This is just simply looping through the range like we were expecting. But what we're going to do is we're now going to add some different parts to it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define something called my outer array that will simply equal an empty array. And really with this one, what we're doing is we're defining our new array that we want to store the values in. That's how we can think about it. And then what we're going to also do is we're going to define an inner array. And so we're going to say, let my inner array equal, again, another empty array. And then what we're going to do is we're going to append this empty array, or sorry, this inner array to the outer array as we're looping through each row. So the first thing that we need to do is when we get to the actual element itself, let's do this. Let's actually remove this component and we'll say my inner array. We're going to call the push method, which is basically kind of like appending it. And we're going to say take the current column we're on, that actual cell value, and just add 2 to it. And then from here, when we're done with that, so once we loop through the entire row or each column in that row, we're then going to push that to the outer array. So we're going to call our my outer array. And then we're going to call the push method. And then we're going to push my inner array. And then from here, I'm going to get rid of this because I really don't need that and I don't want it to do it. So what we're doing here is we're adding 2 to each element in the row. We're going to say here we are defining the outer array and then append the inner array to the outer array. We're just pushing it. That's really all we're doing. Okay, so now that we've done that, what would we want to do in order to, I don't know, put new sales values or, basically put it to this particular range? Well, it's pretty simple for the most part. All we're going to do is we're going to define this range and then we're going to set the values property to it. Because we're not loading it, we don't have to do any await context synced. We're simply just assigning values. So we need to define, I'm just going to move this down, define the new range we want the values at. And so we're going to say let new sales range equal sheet.getRange. And then we're going to say B9 to E14. And then from here, append the values to the range. And so we're going to say new sales range dot values equals my outer array. Bam, just like that. Hopefully there's no errors. Let's see what happens. Cool. So basically it now populated that range with the manipulated values. Again, just for demonstration purposes, that's what it's doing. Let's just take a step back and kind of talk about it a little bit. So up until this point, everything was exactly the same. We're just grabbing the values, right? Right here. Everything's the same. But then we had to think ahead. We're going, okay, we're going to manipulate each value in our array, and then we're going to have to assign it to a new array because we can't just override the existing one. I mean, maybe we could, but at this point, I'm not going to. What we're going to do is we're just going to define an outer array, and then we're going to define an inner array. And so what we'll do is we'll then basically just initialize it. We'll loop through each row in this range, and then we'll loop through each column in each row. And then before we actually loop through each column, we need to initialize a new inner array, which will represent the row that we're currently on in that particular loop. And then all we're doing is we're looping through each element in the row. We're manipulating it, and then we're just pushing that manipulated value to our inner array. And once we're finished looping through each element, we then push that inner array to the outer array. And then from here, oh, sorry, you know what I just realized? I kept this inside the loop. I don't need to do that. This should technically be outside the loop, just like that. So what we do is we push the inner array to the outer array. We define the new range that we want to put the values at, and then we just simply assign those values to that range. Pretty simple for the most part. It's just a loop within a loop. we've defined a new array that we're pushing elements to, and then we're just assigning those values to it. It's pretty straightforward for the most part. Okay, so now that we've seen just transferring, what if I wanted to transfer everything and then the formulas? Well, we can do it. It's just we have to now work with a different component of it. And so again, we can pretty much take exactly what we were doing up here. We're just going to copy this just like that. And we'll actually see that it's pretty much identical. We're going to do this. And then from here, what we'll do, we're going to change, well, that's going to be, no, we can change this one. We're going to say my formulas, and then we're going to say sales range, and then we want formulas R1, C1. You need to use formulas R1, C1 because if you use just regular formulas, something's going to happen. It's just going to keep the same formula, and it's going to populate it down here. But the problem is it's going to keep D3 and C3. We don't want that. We want it to change relative to the position that it's currently on. So we basically want to say, take this formula, put it down here, but now add these two particular columns. So in that situation, multiply these two particular columns. So in that situation, we need to use formulas R1, C1. The regular formulas one will simply just take this D3, C3 and put it down here, but it's not going to actually adjust the cells that it's multiplying. That's kind of the problem with that one. And then from here, we're going to just take this structure because it's pretty much identical. We're just changing a couple things. And we're going to make it a little bit more complex by specifying which ones we actually want to loop through. And so this is the same one. That's fine. We're going to say my formulas. And maybe, for example, when we're manipulating everything, you saw up here, it's like, well, it's changing the headers. Maybe we don't want to change the headers. How would we do that? How would we fix that? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. What we can do is say my formulas, we'll call slice. And then from here, what we'll say is skip the first one. So basically start at 1. So don't start at row 0, start at row 2, for example. And then from here, you can also tell that, hey, maybe we don't want those particular cell values are here. We don't want to be concatenated with those ones. So we're just going to take that same logic and we're going to apply it to the inner loop as well. But we're going to have to do it a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to exit this and I'm going to delete that. All right. And then what we're going to do is only modify the second column. So I just want to modify this one. I want to keep this the same and I want to keep this the same. And this one, that should just change automatically based on the location. So here what we're going to say is just only modify the second column. So only modify the second column. And what we'll do is we'll say my inner array dot push. It's just going to take, row, and then we'll take the 0 element. And then from here, I'm just going to copy this a couple times. And then we're going to say 1. We're going to say 2, and we're going to say 3. And I want to modify the second column to where it adds 2 to it. And then what we're going to do here is this is going to stay the same. So it's going to push that inner array to the outer array. And then we need to change this component down here. So we'll say a new sales range formula, and then that will be B17 to E21. And then what we're going to do is say my sales range formula is going to be this one. And then very important, I'm not going to keep values. Now we're going to say formulas. It's very, very important that you do that. And so from here, what we'll do, I'm just going to delete this little section here because that's just a formula. Let's see what we get. Cool. So this stayed the same. This changed. That stayed the same. And then the formulas changed, which was the important part. Again, I do want to just show you what happens if I left it like that. It changed values. It kept the same ones. So that's the caveat. When you do formulas and you want to move formulas, you have to do formulas R1, C1, or else it's going to just take the same formula, but it's not going to change the relative position. That's the important part. But when we do this, now it's fixing it. So again, just to recap on this function, everything was the same up until here. In fact, if I really wanted to make this even more condensed, I would just get rid of these stuff right here. And that's fine for the most part. You can do whatever you want really technically here. If I want it to be very complete and just not put any unnecessary stuff in here, but I kept it just because I was technically being lazy. But really everything's the same. We're just loading a different range property. We're gonna load those. The structure is the same. The only real different that we changed here is we defined a new starting position by using the slice method. The slice method takes different parameters, says, well, where do you want to start and where do you want to end? Well, you can keep going till the end, but I don't want you to start at 0. I want you to start at 1 and then just loop through each row. Basically take the old value and append it to the inner array except for column 2. Column 2, I actually want you to manipulate the value, and then once you're done adding each value to the array, push the inner array to the outer array, define the range that you want to populate the values at, and then just simply assign it to it, but we're going to make sure that we're putting the formulas property in there as well. So with that being said, that does finish this video when it comes to working with ranges. So if you have any questions about accessing values, looping through a range of values, manipulating a range of values, putting a range of values at a different location, please put those questions down in the comments below and I'll try to get back to you. Also, if you could, please make sure to like the video. We always appreciate the support. And if you're not already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so that way you get regular updates as we release new videos. In our next video, we're going to be working with cell formatting and we're going to see how to format cells. It's very similar to what we were doing here, but we're going to be changing some stuff about it. So very interesting topic, but also important if you want to do kind of the fancy formatting stuff. So thanks again for watching, everybody. We will see you in the next video.